Shabbat Shalom, everybody. I am very proud and honored to be the first woman in the conservative movement to lead a congregation in the state of Texas. And I have not experienced sexism here. I feel respected as your rabbi. But this week's Parsha reminds us that there is misogyny in Judaism, because we read the story of the rape of Dinah. Now, the traditional understandings of this story are pretty awful. And the truth is, it's only in the last few decades that we've had rabbis who are sensitized to the issue of the objectification of women to try and help interpret the story in terms that are more egalitarian and more compassionate. Judaism has come a long way in treating men and women as equals, but it still has some distance to go. I want to start this morning by examining what the traditional commentaries have to say about Dinah. When the story opens, it says, "V'tetzei Dinah," and Dinah went out. There's no backstory that she had any deviance planned. It certainly doesn't tell us what she was wearing. And yet the Midrash says, for a woman to go out was immodest. She was asking for trouble. Rashi says that in that opening line, V'tetzei Dinah bat Leah, it emphasizes that she is the child of Leah and not Jacob. Why, says Rashi? Because she's just like her slutty mother. So where does he get this story from? One of Leah's sons found mandrake root in the field, and he brought it home to Leah. It's a little unclear from the text whether mandrake enhanced virility or fertility, but either way, when Leah's barren sister Rachel saw it, she said, "I want that root." And Leah said, "Fine, I'll give you the root if I get to sleep with our husband tonight." So this was the agreement, and when Jacob came home, Leah said, "It's my turn tonight, buddy." So for this, Rashi labels Dinah as brazen as her mother. Ramban points out that Dinah is the full-blooded sister of Shimon and Levi. She's not a half-sister. And that justifies why they were so angry and slaughtered the entire town of Shechem, thus changing the story that should really be focused on Dinah to be a story about her brothers and the men in her life. And I think for me, the worst is a midrash that says Dinah's rape was a punishment for Jacob. The reason being, when the family is crossing the river Yabok to reunite Jacob's family with Esau's family, it tells us he had his 11 children with him. Now, Jacob had 13 children total. Benjamin has not been born yet, so that 12th child we would think would be there is Dinah. Where is she if only 11 children are told to be crossing the river? It says, Jacob was afraid that Esau would find his niece beautiful and wish to marry her. So Jacob locked her in a box. Not only is it awful to change the pain of Dinah's rape to be about her father, but there's this metaphor of silencing and hiding women and not giving them a choice of what they would like to do. We are the inheritors of a patriarchal religion, Judaism that was a product of its time and place. And traditional Judaism has excluded women from leadership and not given them equal legal rights. Jewish women cannot initiate divorce, no matter how awful the husband. Jewish women have different standards than men about extramarital affairs and the consequences that occur. Traditionally, Jewish women can't lead a community in prayer because they can't count in a minyan. It's a patriarchal tradition. Jewish feminist Dr. Judith Plaskow, in her seminal work, or perhaps more appropriately today, I should say groundbreaking work, she identifies this, right? She says the problems of equal rights are only symptoms of a broader patriarchal worldview. Now, these roles are changing. And at Beth Torah, we celebrate our egalitarianism. In fact, it's part of the origin story of this congregation. But there are some things that I see that are remnants of a time when Judaism wasn't egalitarian. I want to preface this by saying I don't have any plans to change our ritual policies for women here at Beth Torah. And the reason is, if feminism is a form of inclusion, then trying to force someone's hand to participate more in ritual matters than she would like to is not very respectful. I'm hoping that this is the beginning of a conversation, though, once I've shared my perspective with you, about are there ways that we could be more supportive of the women and girls in our congregation to participate more fully in ritual. So I see this as a dialogue for the men and women in the congregation to have with me and with one another. Let's start with our religious school. There is a policy in the school that boys must wear a kippah, and for girls it's optional. So here's what happens. Inevitably, one of the boys doesn't feel like putting on a kippah, and a teacher will enforce the rule, and she'll say something to him along the lines of, "This is just what Jews do." The unspoken message to a little girl is, "But that doesn't include you, honey." When men walk into this building, they immediately put on a kippah, whether they're going to do something mundane like take supplies back to the men's club storage room after the barbecue or come into the sanctuary for prayer. But women don't do that, and our daughters and granddaughters know this. They're being raised to think, well, the only women who really have to wear a kippah are rabbis or educators. And I haven't had the opportunity to tell them how fun a fashion accessory it can be. What about talit? I've been asked a few times since I arrived here to make some policy decisions about when we need to wear a talit. Is it when you're on the bima, period? Is it when you have an aliyah or you're reading from the Torah? What about when you're leading prayer? Okay, but what prayer? Is it that you're leading all of Shacharit or the prayer for our country? Is it when you're reading Haftorah? And the truth is, it's very hard for me to make a decision because this isn't a conversation about the men in our congregation. They're all Jewish adults. They all know that putting on a talit is a Jewish obligation, a mitzvah, a requirement of adult Jews. But it's for the women who choose not to wear a talit. So then I feel really stuck because on the one hand, I don't want to exclude those women from participating in the ritual in the way that they would like or force them to wear a talit. But as someone who strongly believes in being egalitarian, it should either be optional for all of us or required for all of us. There's an event called the Worldwide Wrap. It's a men's club event, but just like our men's club breakfast, it's not meant to be exclusively for men. Women are welcome to participate. And here's what it is. Once a year on Super Bowl Sunday, all around the world, men's clubs sponsor an event where people wrap tefillin, often for the first time or the first time in a long time. The first year I went, there were 3 women in the room, and I was the only one in tefillin. Last year I went, and I was the only woman in the room. A member of another congregation came to me and said, "It's so wonderful to see a young woman wearing tefillin." And the man next to him said, "You idiot, that's the rabbi of Congregation Beth Torah." I wasn't offended at all that he didn't know who I was, but here's what I saw as more problematic. Why should we assume that the only woman who would possibly want to wrap tefillin is a rabbi? And in that moment, I felt like a symbol of an egalitarian movement, not a member of an egalitarian movement. And I really wish that my sisters and my mothers and grandmothers had been with me that day. What about kitchen duty during services? Why is it mostly the women that get up and make sure that the food is prepared for us? I think it may be vestigial from a time when men's prayers were considered an obligation, and for women it was an option. So to disturb a man's spiritual experience was not thinkable. But a woman, okay. I think this is also reflected in our Sunday and Monday morning minions. On Saturdays and Fridays, we're pretty well balanced. But that idea of daily prayer, that it's someone's responsibility to get up, to get out of bed, to make sure that we praise God's name, to make sure that we have a minyan for someone who might need to say Kaddish, has fallen on predominantly men on our Sunday and Monday morning minions. And I'll add one more thought. Some of you have asked me when we do our responsive readings in English why I change the language. For example, if the word says king, you'll hear me say sovereign or monarch. If the word says Lord in English, I'll change it to God. Now, the truth is, in the Hebrew, it does say king or it does say Lord. There's no way around that. Hebrew is a gendered language, and I would hesitate to change the Hebrew language that's been so sacred to our people. But in the expression of the English, I'm sharing my personal theology with the world, which is that I cannot imagine that God has a gender because I do not believe that God is human. So the metaphor of sovereign says royalty and power to me, whereas the metaphor of king says human being. And it is not a priority for me to change our prayer books right now, but there are prayer books that have gender-neutral translations. The core of Judaism has always been its mitzvot. Our rituals are one of the ways we show hierarchy and a way that we show respect. It's about who can or can't participate, who is or isn't given an honor. And I believe the questions that I've raised this morning show that we're not fully egalitarian yet, and that the vestigial patriarchy of Judaism is present even in a congregation as progressive and inclusive as Beth Torah. As the world is struggling to make sense of this barrage of Me Too stories, it's a time for us to take a moment to reflect. Are there ways in which we can make our community a more supportive place for women and girls? I'll share another thought from Jewish feminist Dr. Judith Plaskow. Feminism aims at the liberation of all women and all people, and is thus not a movement for individual equality, but for the creation of a society that no longer construes difference in terms of superiority and subordination. The project of creating feminist Judaism fits into a larger project of creating a world in which all women and all people have both the basic resources they need to survive and the opportunity to name and shape the structures of meaning that give substance to their lives. In the Jewish context, this means reforming every aspect of tradition so that it incorporates women's experience. Only when those who have had their power stolen from them participate fully will Judaism become a religion that includes all Jews, and will it truly be a religion of women and men. Dinah had no voice, and not only did the rabbis not give her one, they degraded her. Today's world is so different from the world in which Dinah lived and the world in which the rabbis first interpreted her story, and I, for one, am extremely grateful. Conservative Judaism believes in the resilience of our tradition. Our beliefs can withstand not only the tension between tradition and change, but in fact, it thrives on them. Our tradition's evolution leads not only to our survival, but our flourishing. Thanks to recent changes in our halakhic practices, we can now include the other 50% of our population in maintaining our traditions. I'm glad to be in a time and place that celebrates equally the contributions of women and men. My pointing out some of our ingrained patterns at Beth Torah does not diminish how much our community has done to support our girls and women. It's simply an invitation to analyze our behaviors and consider doing more. So to that end, I would love it if the women would join me at the Worldwide Wrap this year. And I'll teach you how to put on tefillin ahead of time so it won't be too awkward. For that matter, I'd love it if more women learned how to lead Kiddush, lead a Seder, lead us in Mariv, Kabbalat Shabbat, Shachrit, and Musaf services. I'll find you a teacher, and I'm pretty sure that I can count on our brothers and fathers, our husbands and sons, to support us in stepping up to our ritual roles in the community. And for that matter, gentlemen, if you would like to learn how to light Shabbat candles or braid blessings into your challah, I'd be happy to teach you how to do that too. Shabbat Shalom.